Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're tackling the Phoenicians. You know, those masters of the sea.
Ah, the Phoenicians, always a good one.
Yeah, and you've brought some really great stuff for us to dig into. Some YouTube transcripts that paint a pretty detailed picture and this fantastic article from the World History Encyclopedia.
Yeah, should give us a good, solid foundation.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, our goal today is to, well, sift through all of this and really pull out the most fascinating nuggets about these guys. I mean, we're talking groundbreaking seafaring, that revolutionary alphabet they gave the world, and just trying to wrap our heads around their legacy, how their impact is still felt today.
Right, because it's pretty massive when you really start to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. So where do we even begin with a civilization as expansive as the Phoenicians?
Well, I think the best place to start is always with their origins, right? Like, where did these incredible seafarers actually come from?
Okay, yeah, let's ground ourselves in the where and the when.
So, according to both our YouTube deep dives and the World History Encyclopedia article, the Phoenicians emerged from the Canaanite culture. This was in the Levant, which is basically the area we know today as Lebanon, northern Israel, and Syria.
Okay, so Eastern Mediterranean coast. Got it.
Right. And this was happening way, way back, like around 3000 BCE.
Wow, so we're talking really ancient history here.
Yeah, we are. And from this Canaanite culture sprang those iconic city-states that you always hear about when you talk about the Phoenicians. Bedlos, Sidon, Tyre. Those were like their main hubs.
Yeah, the names everyone kind of recognizes even if they don't know much about the Phoenicians themselves. But they weren't just like small coastal towns, right?
No, no, not at all. These were bustling centers of trade. And this was really early on in human history. Like they were way ahead of the curve in terms of commerce and international trade.
Fascinating. So they were kind of like the New York City or the London of their day.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. And it seems like the geography of their homeland actually played a huge role in pushing them towards the sea, which, they became famous for.
Okay, so how did the land itself shape their destiny?
Well, you've got this mountainous terrain all along the coast, and then just a thin strip of coastal plain. So not a lot of room to expand inland, not ideal for large-scale agriculture.
Makes sense. So they kind of had to look outward for opportunities.
Exactly. And luckily for them, they had access to some
Yeah.
some seriously valuable resources right there on their doorstep. We're talking, of course, the famous cedar wood of Lebanon, which if you're building ships, I mean, that's like the best stuff you could get. Strong, durable, perfect for shipbuilding. And then there were the Murex shells, which gave them that incredibly valuable Tyrian purple dye.
Ah, yes, that legendary purple. We can't talk about the Phoenicians without talking about the purple. I mean, it's practically synonymous with them.
Totally. And even their name Phoenician is actually it comes from that color. The Greeks, they called them phoenix, which originally meant purple.
Oh, wow. So the name itself is tied to this really significant commodity.
Exactly. And it even links back to some of the earlier names for the region, like Kinano, which shows that this purple dye was like a central part of their identity way, way back, even before they were known as the Phoenicians.
I mean, it makes sense if you think about the ancient world purple dye. That was like the ultimate status symbol, like royalty, luxury, power.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was incredibly difficult to produce, so that just added to its value.
So we've got this group of people, incredible seafarers, known for their trade, their purple dye coming from this specific region, the Levant. But were they like a unified nation, like a single empire, or were they something else?
That's a really important distinction. Unlike, say, the Egyptians or later the Romans, the Phoenicians,
Yeah.
they weren't a single unified nation.
So more like a network of independent city states.
Right. They were bound together by culture and trade, but those key city-states, Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, they all operated as politically independent units. It's
Yeah.
actually it's kind of similar to ancient Greece in that way, with all those independent city-states.
Okay, that's really interesting. So less of a monolithic empire, more like a collection of powerful independent hubs all connected by the sea.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly to what they're probably most famous for, their mastery of the sea. I mean, they weren't called the masters of the sea for nothing.
Yeah, that wasn't just a fancy title, right? They earned that reputation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they developed these incredibly advanced shipbuilding techniques, and their knowledge of navigation was really unparalleled at the time. And after the Bronze Age collapse, which happened around 1200 to 1100 BCE, they stepped into the power vacuum in the Mediterranean and became the dominant force in seafaring and trade.
So they really took advantage of that kind of reset moment in history.
They did. And when you think about it, their focus on the sea makes perfect sense, right? I mean, their homeland, the Levant, like we said, it's mountainous, the coastal plain is narrow, so sea travel was just the most practical way to connect their settlements and to transport goods, especially something as bulky and heavy as cedar wood.
Yeah, much easier to float it than to drag it over land. And plus, they had that abundance of cedar wood right there, so they could just keep building ships.
Exactly. And it wasn't just, basic boats. They're credited with developing some pretty groundbreaking nautical technology.
Oh, like what?
Well, for instance, the keel, which gives a ship its stability, they really perfected that. And then on their warships, you had the battering ram on the bow, for ramming enemy ships.
Yeah, the classic naval warfare tactic.
And they even had these sophisticated caulking methods to make sure their ships were watertight.
Hmm.
Now, sadly, no intact Phoenician ships have ever been found. I mean, can you imagine?
Oh, that would be incredible.
But, we do have depictions and artwork, and we have accounts from other civilizations, so we can piece together a pretty good picture of their shipbuilding.
So from what we know, were there like different types of ships for different
Oh
purposes?
yeah, definitely. They had warships like the birems, which were these powerful ships with two tiers of oars, and then they had their big cargo ships, which were they were larger, they had wider hulls, designed specifically for carrying lots of trade goods.
Like the ancient equivalent of container ships.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, they also had smaller vessels for fishing and coastal journeys.
Makes sense. They were covering all their bases, but their reputation for seamanship that went way beyond just having, different types of ships. Like they were known throughout the ancient world for their skill, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Homer and Herodotus, both of them, they praise the Phoenician seafaring abilities. And there's even that famous story of the Sidonian sailors who were from the city of Sidon winning a sailing race that was organized by Xerxes, the Persian king. And supposedly Xerxes himself, when he traveled, he preferred to sail on Phoenician ships. He trusted their skill that much.
Wow, that says a lot. But what always blows my mind is, they're navigating this vast sea without any of the modern instruments we have today. I mean, how did they do that?
Right. It's pretty amazing. For a long time, people thought that they mostly stuck close to the shore, that they, sailed during the day using landmarks, and then at night they'd anchor and wait till morning.
So like kind of hugging the coastline and hoping for the best.
Kind of, yeah. But actually, as archaeologists and historians have learned more, that view it's been revised quite a bit. Turns out they were much more skilled and daring than we originally thought.
Okay, so what was the reality of Phoenician navigation?
Well, they definitely used landmarks and dead reckoning, which is, calculating your position based on your speed and direction. But they were also really good at celestial navigation, meaning they used the stars to guide them.
Wow, so they were sailing by the stars. That's incredible.
It is, and they were particularly skilled at using the pole star, which the Greeks actually called Phoenike, in honor of the Phoenician skill in using it for navigation.
Oh, that's a cool little detail. And on top of that, they had a deep understanding of winds and currents, right?
Absolutely. So while they probably didn't have, detailed charts like we have today, they had this accumulated knowledge that was passed down through generations of sailors and captains, and that knowledge was their real map, so to speak.
Makes you realize how vital that kind of that generational knowledge was back then.
Absolutely. And another interesting thing is that because the Mediterranean coastline is often mountainous, they could actually stay within sight of land on many of their routes. And surprisingly, sometimes hugging the shore was actually more dangerous because of, unpredictable currents and shallow waters.
Huh. So sometimes it was actually safer to venture out a bit further into the open sea. Who knew?
Right. It's fascinating. And this mastery of the sea, this incredible ability to navigate and to build these sturdy ships, that was really the engine behind their vast trade network and their expansion across the Mediterranean.
And speaking of trade, that was a pretty big driver for them, right? What were they after? What were the hot commodities of the day?
Well, a few things. Silver was huge. They were sailing all the way to Spain to get their hands on silver. And gold, of course, gold was always in high demand. They were getting that from Africa.
Makes sense. Precious metals, always a good investment.
right? And then tin. Tin was really important,
Yeah.
especially for making bronze. And they may have been sailing as far as the Scilly Isles or even Cornwall in Britain to get tin.
Wow, so they were crisscrossing the entire Mediterranean.
They were. I mean, their trade network was vast. We're talking Cyprus, Rhodes, the Aegean Islands, Egypt, Sicily, Malta, Sardinia, Italy, France, North Africa, the Balearic Islands, the Iberian Peninsula.
It's like a roll call of ancient Mediterranean hotspots.
Yeah, and they even sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is, the Strait of Gibraltar, out into the Atlantic.
So they weren't afraid to push the boundaries of the known world.
Not at all. And what's really interesting is that over time, many of these trading posts they set up, they actually evolved into permanent colonies.
Ah, so they were laying down roots in these new lands.
They were, and some of the most important ones. Well, of course, there's Carthage. I mean, everybody knows Carthage. It was founded around 814 BCE by Queen Dido or Elissa, depending on which source you're looking at.
Yeah, Carthage, that became a major power in its own right, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then there was Gadir, which is modern-day Cadiz in Spain,
Mhm.
and Utica, which is another important colony in North Africa. And these colonies, they were often strategically placed to control key trade routes.
So it was about more than just trade. It was about power and influence as well.
Right. It was about securing their position in the Mediterranean. And speaking of pushing boundaries, our sources talk about some really incredible voyages that the Phoenicians and later the Carthaginians undertook.
Okay, like give me some examples. What kind of voyages are we talking about?
Well, there's the circumnavigation of Africa. This was supposedly around 600 BCE, and it was sponsored by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho.
Wait, they sailed all the way around Africa.
That's what Herodotus claims.
Yeah.
He says it took them 3 years to complete the journey.
3 years. That's insane. I mean, that's like sailing to Mars back then.
It was a massive undertaking. And there's debate about whether it actually happened, but Herodotus does mention this interesting detail, that the sailors claim to have had the sun on their right as they sailed westward around the southern tip of Africa.
Okay, and that would only be possible if they really did round the Cape of Good Hope.
Exactly. So it lends some credence to the story, but even if we take that one with a grain of salt, there are other voyages that are pretty well documented.
Okay, what else?
Well, there's the voyage to Britain. That was around 450 BCE, and it was led by a Carthaginian explorer named Himilco.
So they were venturing out into the Atlantic.
They were. And then a few decades later, there was Hanno's voyage down the Atlantic coast of Africa. Some accounts say he might have reached as far south as Cameroon or even Gabon.
Wow, so they were really they were pushing the limits of exploration.
They were. And then, of course, there's the famous expedition to Ophir, which is mentioned in the Bible. This was during the reign of King Solomon and his alliance with King Hiram of Tyre.
Yes, Solomon and Hiram, the ultimate power couple of the ancient world.
Right. So they joined forces and sent a fleet down the Red Sea in search of all sorts of riches. Gold, silver, ivory, precious gems. Now, where exactly Ophir was, that's still a mystery.
Lost City of Gold vibes.
Yeah, totally. But the fact that these voyages apparently only happened every 3 years suggests that it was a really long and difficult journey.
Yeah, I mean they weren't just popping over for a weekend getaway.
No, not at all. And then there are even hints that the Phoenicians might have sailed even further afield, maybe even reaching islands like Madeira, the Canary Islands, and the Azores.
Out into the Atlantic even further than we thought.
Exactly. Now, the evidence for those voyages it's pretty thin. We're talking mostly about accounts from ancient historians and maybe a few Carthaginian coins that have been found on those islands.
Tantalizing clues, but not conclusive proof.
Right. But it's definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that are truly mind-blowing, we can't talk about the Phoenicians without talking about their alphabet.
Yeah, I mean that's arguably their greatest contribution to human history, right?
It's up there, for sure. I mean, think about it. Around 1050 BCE, they developed this incredibly efficient phonetic alphabet with just 22 consonant symbols.
22 symbols for all the sounds of their language. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and what made it so revolutionary was that It represented sounds, not whole words or syllables, like some of the writing systems that came before it.
Right, like cuneiform or hieroglyphs, which were much more complex and harder to learn.
Exactly. So the Phoenician alphabet, it was a huge simplification. It made writing and reading much more accessible to more people, especially merchants who, they needed a practical system for keeping records and making agreements.
So it really democratized literacy in a way.
It did. And
Yeah.
and it wasn't just a local phenomenon. I mean, this alphabet, it spread like wildfire throughout the Mediterranean.
Okay, how did that happen?
Well, the Phoenician merchants, they were constantly traveling,
Mhm.
right? And they took their alphabet with them. And because it was so simple and adaptable, other cultures, they adopted it and modified it to fit their own languages.
So they were kind of like accidental ambassadors for literacy.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
And the most significant example of this is, of course, the Greek alphabet. The Greeks, they adopted the Phoenician alphabet and they made some changes, and that became the basis for the Latin alphabet, which of course is the alphabet that we use today.
Wow, so the Phoenicians, they're responsible for the very letters we're using right now.
Indirectly, yes. I mean, it's amazing to think about, right? The impact of this one invention is still being felt thousands of years later.
It's truly mind-boggling. And beyond the alphabet, their trade and their travels, they must have spread other ideas and cultural influences as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they were constantly interacting with all these different cultures, so they acted as this kind of bridge between different parts of the ancient world.
Okay, so what kind of cultural exchange were they involved in?
Well, for instance, their alphabet, it definitely influenced the development of the Greek writing system. And in Greek mythology, this connection is attributed to the figure of Cadmus.
Right, Cadmus, the legendary founder of Thebes.
Exactly. And they also probably played a role in introducing Near Eastern myths and stories to the Greeks.
Hmm.
Like, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is this really famous Mesopotamian story.
Oh yeah, Gilgamesh, the original hero's journey.
Right. And then there's their artistry, their skill in things like glass making and dye production. They were known for their craftsmanship, and those techniques they would have been shared and adopted by other cultures.
So they were kind of like cultural trendsetters in a way.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. They were definitely at the forefront of cultural exchange in the ancient Mediterranean.
So we've got this picture of the Phoenicians as these incredible seafarers, these master traders, these cultural ambassadors, but their history wasn't always smooth sailing, so to speak. They often found themselves interacting with some of the major empires of the ancient world.
Right. And those interactions weren't always peaceful or equal. I mean, they often existed under the shadow of much larger and more powerful empires like the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the
So they
Persians.
had to navigate those power dynamics carefully.
They did. And they were good at it. I mean,
Yeah.
they were skilled diplomats, and they knew when to pay tribute to these larger powers to maintain their own autonomy.
Smart move. Don't poke the bear unless you absolutely have to.
Right. But they also formed alliances, strategic partnerships that were mutually beneficial. Like, for instance, there was the famous alliance between King Hiram of Tyre and King Solomon of Israel.
Ah, yes, Solomon and Hiram. We mentioned them earlier. What was the deal with their alliance?
Well, it was a pretty sweet deal for both of them. Hiram, he provided Solomon with cedar wood and skilled craftsmen to help build Solomon's famous temple in Jerusalem.
Ah, so the Phoenicians were the ones who helped build the temple.
They played a major role, yeah. And in return, Tyre gained access to overland trade routes and possibly even access to the Red Sea trade, which was a whole new world of opportunity for them.
So it was a win-win. Everybody got something out of it.
They did, but later on, they did face periods of direct subjugation, where they were basically conquered and ruled by these larger empires.
Okay, like give me an example. Who conquered them?
Well, the Assyrians, for instance, starting in the 9th century BCE, the Assyrians, they demanded tribute and military support from the Phoenician city-states.
So they weren't exactly independent anymore.
No. But even under Assyrian rule, the Phoenician cities, they managed to maintain some degree of economic autonomy. They were still allowed to trade and do their thing. And a similar pattern played out under Persian rule. which started in the 6th century BCE.
So they were kind of walking that tightrope between independence and being part of these larger empires.
There were,
Yeah.
and they were pretty good at it for a long time. But then, of course, Alexander the Great came along, and that changed everything.
Yeah, Alexander the ultimate conqueror. He wasn't exactly known for being lenient with the cities that resisted him.
No, he wasn't. And most of the Phoenician cities, they surrendered to Alexander when he arrived. But
Hmm.
Tyre decided to resist.
Big mistake.
Yeah, it didn't end well for them. Alexander, he laid siege to Tyre in 332 BCE, and the siege, it lasted for months. It was brutal. And in the end, Alexander, he conquered the city, and he made an example of them. He destroyed much of the city, and he sold many of the inhabitants into slavery.
Wow, that's pretty dark. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for Phoenician independence.
It was. After Alexander, the region came under the control of his successors, the Macedonians, and then it was ruled by the Ptolemies of Egypt and then the Seleucids. There were a few brief moments of independence for some of the cities like Tyre and Sidon, but eventually the region was conquered by Tigranes of Armenia, and then finally it was incorporated into the Roman Empire as part of the province of Syria.
So by the time the Romans arrived, the Phoenicians were pretty much absorbed into this larger imperial system.
They were. And under Roman rule, their distinct cultural identity, it gradually started to fade. And then later on, the Arab conquests in the 7th century CE that further diminished their separate identity.
So they were kind of subsumed by these larger cultural and political forces.
They were. But even though their political power faded, their influence, it didn't just disappear overnight.
No, because their legacy, it's much bigger than just their political power. Right?
Exactly. I mean, their cities, they remained important centers of trade and culture for centuries, even under Roman rule. And of course, there's the alphabet, which, that's their most enduring legacy. It's the foundation of our writing system today.
So even though they may not have existed as a distinct political entity anymore, their impact on the world, it continued to be felt.
Absolutely. I mean, they were pioneers. They connected different parts of the ancient world through their mastery of the sea, and they spread knowledge and ideas through their incredible alphabet.
It's really remarkable when you think about it. And today, the people of Lebanon, they see the Phoenicians as their ancestors.
They do. And there's evidence to support that connection, both historically and genetically. And some people even say that you can see echoes of the Phoenicians' seafaring traditions and their entrepreneurial spirit in modern-day Lebanon.
So in a way, the Phoenicians they're still sailing the seas, even if it's in a different form.
That's a nice way to put it. So to kind of wrap things up, I think the big takeaway here is that the Phoenicians, they were so much more than just, traders or merchants. They were innovators, they were explorers, they were cultural bridge builders.
And their story it's a story of resilience, right? I mean, they faced all these challenges, they were conquered, they were absorbed into these larger empires, but their impact on the world, it endured.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. How often do you stop and really consider the origins of our alphabet?
Not often enough, probably.
Right. But the next time you're writing something, or you're reading a book, or you're even just, scrolling through your phone, take a moment to appreciate those 26 letters, those symbols that allow us to communicate and to share ideas.
Because those came from the Phoenicians.
They did. And it makes you wonder, what other seemingly basic things in our lives have these really ancient and surprising origins? I mean, the world is full of these hidden connections just waiting to be discovered. And who knows, maybe our listeners, maybe they'll be inspired to go on their own deep dives and uncover some of these connections themselves.
That's what we like to hear. So keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.
Until then.